Hi, and welcome to another episode of a documentary podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Catherine.
And we're two filmmakers who talk about documentaries.
Yes.
I love our awkward intros.
I know. This just gets straight to the point, you know. I mean, it goes with our title, as we said before.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So today's episode is exciting and different. We have an interview with Ryan Balas, who directed a lot of films, including this new documentary, Good Monsters, which is beautiful.
Yes. Incredible cinematography. It's a very touching portrait of an artist, but through what makes him an artist.
Absolutely. I think he does a really good job at avoiding the artist documentary tropes.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that in the best way possible. It feels like really original and personal, and you're living with this person. And I know you were really appreciating the cinematography in it, and we didn't really get to talk with him about it, so...
He touched briefly on it, but he shot it himself, and there's some scenes where he knows a camera and he knows lighting incredibly well, and it just continually adds, I think, to the intimate moments in the film.
Absolutely, and I really appreciated the colors.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about the contrast between some of it's shot in black and white and some of it's in color.
There's so much that we could have touched on.
So much more, yeah.
We'll have to have him back on.
But it's a great interview, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I had a lot of fun doing this interview. Yeah. I think we'll skip the part where we talk about films that we've been watching, unless you want to talk about it.
I haven't seen anything that stood out to me lately. So, yeah, I think we can probably just jump straight into the interview.
Yeah, I think we'll just jump straight into this. He talks a little bit about where to see his films, but look up Robel Films, ROBEL Films, and there will be a link in the description, and you can check out this new film, Good Monsters.
Yeah, I definitely highly recommend it.
Hey, I'm Ryan. I'm Ryan Balas. I've got a new documentary called Good Monsters that I'm just about to premiere in Indianapolis. I made the film because I met the subject in Indianapolis when I attended the film festival like 10 years ago. He worked for the design company that that helps market the film festival, and we became good friends, and so I made a film about him, not about the festival or anything, but and so now we're about to premiere it back where we met, which is pretty cool. I've been making feature films for about a decade, I guess, maybe 11 years or so, on my own dime, out of my own pocket, which doesn't mean that much because it literally costs like a dime sometimes. And I've made about, I guess, at least a film a year, if not two, and I'm trying to triple that if I can. I'm trying to put out 12 feature projects this year. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's like my goal.
Jeez.
Some of those are stuff that I shot, you know, like this has been like an ongoing 5-year doc project, so that'll count as one of them. But
yeah, let's talk a little bit about that because I became aware of you. Man, I don't even know how I came across you guys.
I actually was wondering that too.
No, it might have been because so whenever I was making my first films, I was really into like Joe Swanberg, and I think you guys did a movie with him.
We did, yeah.
And then like later on down the road, maybe when me and Zach, who you guys know, but maybe people listening to the podcast don't know, is like my filmmaking partner when we're making a lot of narrative films, and we were making a feature film, and I think that I was just looking for like no budget films or something. I don't know exactly how I searched it, but I came across NSFW.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I thought the artwork was really cool, and the fact that you guys made a book looked really cool, so I actually just ordered it online, sight unseen.
Mm-hmm.
And loved it, and then
that's right.
And then I watched a bunch of your other films that I think were on Hulu at the time, and then we were like following each other on Instagram, and yeah.
I've started so many legit friendships through Instagram.
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
how it's happened. Like film ones, same, and actually Vimeo for some reason. I met my friend Eddie, who I've made a film with. This guy Edgar Munez. He's a director in California. I think we met on Vimeo. I don't know, but same kind of thing where like I was on the hunt for like new stuff, and he had made like all these films that nobody ever heard of, and I was just got obsessed. Same thing.
Yeah.
So I like internet friends the best, I think.
Totally, me too. Cool. So with that, let's get into your new film a little bit. So
Cool.
It's called Good Monsters.
That's right.
And let's give people an introduction into what it's about and who it's about.
Cool. Well, it's funny enough you mentioned NSFW in the book, because that was a project that Eric Stein and I worked on together. So Eric, he designed the whole book. He printed the book. He did that was his baby, and helped make the film. He's this kind of amazing designer, and artist from Indianapolis. Well, originally from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and so the film. We met at the film festival, and then the film didn't really start. We didn't really start making it till about 5 years later. So it took about 5 years to make. We started making it 5 years ago, something like that. And we started making it because I was attending the festival again for another film, and I wanted to spend like a week hanging out with him because we had become good friends. And so I told him I was going to come shoot some stuff because I really loved his art, and I wanted to make maybe an art film, some sort of film about his work. And he's not. What's interesting about Eric is you would never consider him a chatty guy. Like, he's not somebody who's like gonna just wear his heart on his sleeve. Most people who probably have known him for 20 years, when they see this film, are gonna be completely blown away. Just because he's not a chatty guy. But luckily, I am inquisitive and insistent, and bothered him for a couple of summers. And I think we started to dig in. But the first year was really about just like, tell me about your life, tell me about your upbringing, how's that influence your art, kind of because I thought he was like a really cool, like just hip dude. And so I started to learn a little bit about his family. He's biracial, and that plays into the film a little bit. And it became this sort of glaring, I don't know if I want to say issue, but topic was, his relationship with his father, which was sort of estranged. He hadn't seen his father in 20 or 25 years. And for most of the film, it was like, well, maybe eventually we'll talk about that and how that relates to your art, which is what the film sort of ended up being. But it was also like, maybe we'll meet him, maybe we'll... And that, and it used to be like, well, the film's not done until they meet. And then I started realizing, of course, I don't want to give anything away, but the emotional toil of doing something like that is really tricky. So it was always sort of, ball was always in his court as far as like if that was going to happen. And then one day I realized we had made the film, and it was, I had sort of, I would say 95% of the movie is just Eric by himself, which is quite a feat considering it's a 65-minute feature doc, and he's the only voice. I'd never made a film like that in my life. It's usually a bunch of people talking wall to wall. So I don't know. I think that in short, the film is really about this sort of biracial artist trying to figure out his work by exploring the relationship with his estranged and what we learn imprisoned father.
So how receptive was he to opening up? Because I feel like at times it seems like he's going through it as he's speaking it. Like it's something of, like he's realizing it as he's talking. And did he open up that quickly, or like you said, you knew him for over like 5 years before you kind of started the project?
Yeah, we had been talking for 5 years about stuff, so I had a sense of his life and what was going on. I would say that I can tell, especially in the early days when he was sort of performing for me, and even later in the film when he was sort of performing, like our best stuff. We did this interview. We did this road trip sort of the last summer that we were shooting. We had shot some stuff after that, but we did this road trip to try to just sort of wear ourselves out and like give a sense of like trajectory and like going somewhere, and like we called it our spiritual journey. And it was just like this 3-week kind of through the South road trip, and that was when we like started to break down a lot of those walls, just because it was like just sheer tiredness. Like we had, I would say that I'm probably the world's expert on his mind outside of him, and I still am learning kind of crazy stuff. Even after the film, I learned stuff about his family life that was like completely shocking to me that that never made it into the film, that won't make it into the film. That's, I'm just stuff that's like, wow, where was that when we were doing these like long interviews? But really, I would say, like, for me, one of the bigger breakthroughs was we were shooting in New Orleans, and we had been on the road for like maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks, just like driving different places, hanging out in cities. And Eric is very, I think he would say he's bipolar, but Eric he lives alone, or he used to mostly live alone, and really requires a lot of alone time, a lot of like personal time. And so being in the road with Deirdre and I, just the three of us for long extended periods, was definitely tough on him. But I think there was a moment in New Orleans where he was just sort of like, I'd been asking him all these questions all day long, and the car rides and stuff, we just went nonstop talking. And he sort of like, those walls just broke down. You could just tell that there was just like, it felt tense. Like, it was like kind of scary to do the interview. Like, I was nervous, but it was just a matter of like, all right, let's just connect. Let's just take this time. Like, we can feel the tension. Let's just take this time and like talk and like explore what that tension is. And I think that's when we got to a lot of the stuff about like sort of the pain, because we've been, and like the pain that he'd been living with for so long. It was like, that's not easy to tap into every day. And 30 years, 35 years of sort of childhood trauma, essentially. And somebody's like knocking at its door constantly for weeks at a time. But that's, so I wouldn't say he was easy to open up, but I did enough what I would consider like exploratory missions that we got to where we needed to go, I think.
I'm curious about, when I was watching the film, I was just really struck by his relationship with his dog, and just those scenes of him, like, this isn't really giving anything away, because like, one of the first scenes is just him feeding the dog with his hand, like reaching into the dog bowl and like feeding the dog. And there was just something so telling about that, and I think that it really ties into like kind of his relationships and all that stuff. And just like, and he mentions like letting this dog into his life. Like, how did you kind of view that while you were filming it and whenever you were editing the film?
Well, I mean, his relationship with Solomon, his dog, was incredible. And that's like apparent out of the gate. And now I saw Solomon, I mean, his sort of the golden years of his life, his last like sort of 5 years of his life, and I saw him age and go from being a pretty healthy dog to a pretty unhealthy dog. And seeing Eric sort of respond to that was fairly interesting. And I was really nervous, I mean, in general, just because I know that bond was so special. And looking through Eric's childhood photo albums and stuff, he's in pictures with all kinds of, I mean, dogs played a very important part of his life. And I started to draw the comparison, as I think I do in the film, that he was sort of, the dog became this sort of conduit for love or something that he needed, that he couldn't. And many people are this way with animals. I think that they have a hard time interacting with humans or like dealing with other human relationships, that animals kind of become a safety place. And for Eric, and for Solomon, in many ways, Solomon was like a single person dog as well. Like Eric has horror stories about people being bit by Solomon, and Solomon got to know me because I would spend weeks sleeping on the floor near his dog bed. But he's not the kind of dog that you get too close to or put your camera in his face. But we also created enough of a bond that it worked. But I mean, it became very apparent as his health was declining, that there was something really beautiful happening. That Eric was also opening up himself to realizing that Solomon wasn't going to be around forever, and that he needed to love other creatures, essentially, if he was going to survive.
Absolutely. I think that came across really beautifully. And I think that was just the whole film, like, was handled with so much care and like tenderness in a way, and I really appreciated that about it. Like, it seemed like the film really cares about this person, and then this person really cares about this dog, and there's just all these like feelings, and man, I don't even know. I don't know what to say about it. It just it really affected me.
No, I completely agree, because I felt like it was so intimate and like humanistic at times, and I was just curious of how you picked what parts of his life to include, because you created such a dynamic character, but one that was so relatable in many ways, even though like I don't have too much in common with him, but it was a really great portrait of a person. So with all your footage, how did you sort of hone down what you wanted to focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that's like every documentary, well, every film, I think that's the inherent question. And in this case too, like I said, I have 5 years worth of footage, and some of it was, process, like art process, him making stuff. And some of it was just talking about love, and then stuff talking about family. And we talked, we definitely, what became apparent was his relationship with his father and his relationship with his dog. And so then those two things kept coming up in the sort of line of questioning. And I think that, I had made a version of the film that was a little more straightforward, a little less, if anyone knows my work, it's that I probably chase emotional arcs over like sort of strong narrative arcs. And in this case, I essentially felt like I had made a film that explained his story, but it was just it didn't have any of the heart. And so I essentially started making...
Can I interject real quick? Because you're touching on a thing that I wanted to get to, is just that that was just such a noticeable thing that when I was going in to watch a documentary about an artist, I was expecting what you were saying that you almost made. And then what I was presented with was just so different than that. And yeah, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, no, 100%. I had made that film and was like, well, this might just be it. And no one really likes it. And I'd shown it to some people that I trust, and I'd sent it to some film festivals, and it was like not sticking at all. And I was like, God damn it. I thought I had this like brilliant character, and I care so much about him, and there's all this stuff that I know, and it just wasn't coming across. So I essentially started making a new film out of the material. I was like, well, maybe I can use some of the road trip material, and I can make this sort of like poetic narrative film. And I'll never say it's a documentary. It'll just be sort of. So I sort of pulled out all the sound bites. I started over. I called it Solomon. And so that was like its final working title before we came back around to Good Monsters. But then, so really the first part of that film is like me experimenting with the style of just watching him. Because I hadn't shot that much. It turned out I'd shot a lot of verite style stuff, but I had this like incessant like need to put in all this information about him and like stack it full of like facts. And once I pulled all that stuff out and like gave up and just started watching him and the way he moves and like his sort of energy and like elliptical way of thinking and like and really being drawn in by, instead of making it about how he makes his work, it was about saying like, well, if I were going to make a film version of his work or the way he thinks, like what would that feel like? And I think his work has so much heart, not on the face, but like once you dig into it, that I think that's like, that helped a lot to sort of, and then it became about like not worrying, because like I said, we went on this road trip, and that was like there's a clear narrative to a road trip, or a clear trajectory. We went from one place to the next place to the next place. And I started organizing the footage that way, like, well, then we were in New Orleans, and this is what happened in New Orleans, and then we were in Austin, this is what happened in Austin. And that didn't work at all, because it needed to be about, like, what was the emotional arc during that stuff, and how can that stuff be visually symbolic of the things he's going through. So it didn't, the audience doesn't need to know, like, now we're in Austin, and Austin did this to us. It was just about, like, well, that one shot of him drinking at the bar, kind of drunk, really fits in this mood right now where he's kind of losing his mind.
I think that's one of the things Catherine and I talk a lot about with like the films that we watch, and the ones that we end up liking are the ones that avoid just information dumps and really kind of focus on that, like kind of trusting your audience a little bit. Like maybe it's not important that we know every single thing that's happening, but like you said, like focusing on that emotional arc. Like maybe the story is taking place but maybe the timeline is skewed.
Right.
Because there was one point where I was like, oh, are they in a different city? But then it's just sort of like a fleeting thought, because you're like, that's not the point. It's more of, why is he creating art? What is his personal journey? Versus, I guess the place is kind of irrelevant. And that was... So were you editing as you were going along and trying to figure out what you needed? And what was that process like? Because that seems like a bit...
It was, I mean, I would have never abandoned the film because it's not in my nature. But it was... and it's such a relief now to be on the other end of it. I mean, quite frankly, because I was like, for all my films, both narrative and documentary, because the approach is almost the same for me. I do a lot of improvised feature narrative work as well. So I'm always sort of shooting and cutting. Yeah, so I like each other's work. I am always shooting, cutting. And trying to like sort of piece it. It's like for me, it's constantly trying to crack the structural puzzle and emotional puzzle of the film. And so it was a tough road to get to even the first version of the film that no one liked, and I didn't like, that I wasn't happy with. But the final version of the film that you saw, was actually fairly easy to get to once I gave up all the bullshit and just like gave into the film and let it be this sort of poetic thing. Then the film, like, I had all these years, I had all these little pieces that I had worked on that could suddenly made sense to me, that suddenly could work. And when I allowed the footage to be fresh again, I had, especially that first summer, I'd shot for like maybe a week, and then I'd spent a year just cutting that footage. Just like a week's worth of footage. It was like three or four shooting days total worth of footage. And I spent a year just thinking about it, and I was like, God, I didn't make a film. And it turns out I made about 15 minutes of a film, maybe. I don't even know if there's that much of that stuff in there, but it was like vital to, I mean, there's 30 hours of stuff that's like totally vital to the fabric of the film that's not in the actual cut. So all those different edits, all those different shoots, like they're all baked in somehow, for sure.
I was going to ask, did you seek out any like advice from Eric while editing, or did he kind of have a say in the final product?
He was always invited to see the first cut for sure, and I would never show the film without his blessing. In fact, I didn't do any release for him until the film was done, because I wanted it to be his story. And in some ways too, it's like, and I had sought out, like, for him, once he first saw a cut, he saw the first version of it, essentially, that had about maybe 2 years ago. And he loved it just because it was like, well, you captured our conversations. Like, all these years we've just been talking, and now this is like seeing them all at once. It was sort of like this photo album in a way. I think he just wanted me to push it, that it was okay. I always, we censored his father's name in this version of the film. Stuff like that, where like input like that was really important to me, that maybe he had, like, when in the early days he might have been like, well, who cares, he was angry with his father in a lot of ways, but that softened a little bit, and so like his opinions have changed. And even now, he said he has to accept that the film is sort of a time capsule. That stuff he says in the film that he felt in the moment has changed and shifted, and as it does when you're a person. So I would say that he certainly, our conversations helped inform the edit, but he wasn't sitting over my shoulder or anything, as far as, because in many ways what's fascinating to me is that I hear myself in the edit too, and my voice through him and through Troy. I mean, that's always the case when you cut a film, but like there's moments where he's talking about feeling, when they're talking about like exploiting characters and all this stuff, and it was like, having that in the film is also my own insecurity of like, what am I doing to Eric or doing to the biracial experience? Am I any authority to be portraying that or helping portray that?
So I found really fascinating his struggle with his like dual identity, and I found that a bit relatable, and how he was kind of getting lost in that and found a lot of isolation, because he's both potentially bipolar, biracial, his artist life, non-artist life, and then both the upbringing between his dad and his mom. Was that also something because I think as artists in general, we kind of have to deal with that. Like, what is our true identity? Is that something that
Sure.
you brought into the film as well, or that it was more of his story?
You know, I don't know. I think now, even thinking about it, it's like I'm sure. I mean, he was constantly posed this question of like, who am I, and what is blackness, and am I black enough? Am I white enough? You know, and you hear that across the board. I think in many biracial stories, and certainly biracial artists that we had met along the way for this film, who felt that they sort of are always right in towing the line between two different sort of identities. And I mean, I think most artists can relate to that as well, to some extent. I mean, to the extent that like, and most people can relate to this idea that we are multiple people at once, you know, and it goes much beyond your sort of racial identity. And I think what our conversations that we've had even recently, where I think, you know, what Eric struggled with is how he perceived his blackness even then, and like how he perceives it now, or how he like that as an ever shifting identity for everyone. And I think that it's not. That's why he was afraid. Like, I don't want to put that in stone in a film because I'm going to change my feelings about it. And that and in some ways I worried that like I was sort of pushing like, well, I need an answer for the film, and I need like you to tell me because it's an unknown to me. And so and luckily with a lot of grace, Eric's taught me lots of things about that. So I would say that the idea of identity came from Eric, but certainly I wrestled with it too, and I wrestled a lot with you know, and it wasn't his obligation to me or to the film to define any of that, you know, and I don't know that he was even ready to, but it was a part of his life, and I think ultimately it's been a good thing for him to have to wrestle with.
But I think it's better that it isn't defined, because it makes it so relatable, because that's always it's just always a journey of figuring out who you are. And like he said, one of my favorite things he said is like the chapters of your life, and it's things are constantly changing, and so your identity, it's never set in stone. And I think that was captured super well. Yeah,
it's also like who you are to other people, and how, you know, if we're mirrors to other people's perceptions of ourselves, and how that changes. And like in our different chapters, we're different identities because we're interacting sometimes with different people in different situations, you know. So it's sort of always changing. And what's fascinating, I think, in the case of this film, is like he was taking the time to reflect on very specific moments that he could like see, like he said, the chapters. He could identify chapters in his life. I thought that was really interesting, and that has somewhat to do with. I mean, he's still a young man, but like it has to do with getting to a certain age too, where you can kind of take a little time to check in. Like, wow, I'm a completely different person than I was. And that's the beautiful thing about making these personal films too, is like they really are capturing time.
I'm kind of curious to talk about kind of switching gears a little bit to you and I mean, you've made so many films, and like you said, you're making like a film a year, and then you worked on this film for a while, for 5 years. And how do you keep motivated and inspired? And
well, it's some of it's impulsive. I've been thinking a lot about how I impulsively create, because if I don't, I'm worried that my heart's going to stop or something. So it's really a fear of death. That's my inspiration. I think there's a long line of people like that. But, you know, I mean, for the first time in a while, the other day, I've been thinking about this like 12 projects in the year kind of thing, and thinking about just like really opening my mind to what that means, and what I could make that's like, you know, I shoot a ton of like food videos and for like commercial stuff, and then I was like, well, how can we expand what we do with food and like make other work, and like how you know, I don't know, and for the first time I stopped. I mean, for the last couple of years I was thinking about like, how can I make projects that do well on Amazon? You know, like NSFW did pretty good. Other films have done pretty okay as far as like movies that cost nothing making something. And I started to focus a lot on that. Like, well, what's the poster going to be? How can we make money making movies? And for the first time recently, I was like, I just stopped giving a shit about that at all. And was like, I if I want to make a 40-minute poem, like I'm going to do that because like it's not about the royalty check. It's like really the true, and it seems cliche, but it's like the true joy of creating. And like I started to feel some of that come back, where it was like I'm thinking about a project or an idea because I just love the idea of making it. Like I love the idea of spending time with people. And my brother always says this. I make a lot of films, a lot of work with my brother, and he says we make films to have friends. And so that really is like as I make enough commercial work to know that there's like, and it's not completely heartless or soulless because it's not possible for me to do that, but it is nice to lean back into the personal projects and get inspired by just watching people and just getting obsessed about how we interact with each other and how our relationships and change and morph and that stuff's not going to go away. So it's like I'm going to have to find real joy in that kind of work if I'm going to keep doing, working at the pace I want to and at the level I want to.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was also thinking about, because you and I come from making films with like no money that have a specific like we're just gonna do it. We're gonna get together on the weekends and then we're gonna edit in our free time and put it out there. And how do I articulate this though?
No, I mean I hear what you're saying as far as like I don't wait for permission, and that has a lot to do with the fact that some of it has a lot to do with privilege. Mm-hmm. Certainly being patted on the back at the most basic things probably my entire life has given me an absurd amount of courage to do stuff that other people haven't dreamed of or have dreamed of, but certainly didn't feel permission to do. I lack any sort of respect for authority, and I don't.
Yeah,
that sounds worse than it is. But.
No, I think that's true. No, I think that's what I'm trying to get at is like, how do we as filmmakers who are in this changing media landscape embrace this idea that like we always talk about how you can go make a film on your iPhone or something, or you can just make a film with what you have. But then we like get scared and we're like, oh no, I need to.
We get in our heads.
I was kind of I was texting with Ryan last night and about how I'm making this documentary, and I felt the need to apologize because I was shooting it on a Canon, and it was just like one of those things where like it creeps in even with us, who are people that consider ourselves DIY people. Like, how do we get past that and just like push and make the things that we want,
Well, we have to ignore capitalism. To some extent, it's like,
that's a recurring theme.
If IndieWire, puts out, this is going to be my little pissed off at IndieWire for a moment, but, they'll do an article of like the 20 cameras they used at Sundance, right? Mm-hmm. And it's all the Alexa Mini for the most part. It's basically an ad, and maybe is perhaps an ad for the Alexa Mini. And then you start searching it, and then you start thinking, well, what can I afford that's close to that? And then all of a sudden B&H is advertising to you on Facebook of the camera you should buy. And that becomes the obsession is like, well, I can't make my thing and compete with Sundance or some other institution unless I have these things, unless I pay large media companies lots of my money, double what I'll make making the film to make it. And you sort of have to break that. So we're being bombarded with the bar, with the line of like, this is what's considered professional. This is the only way to do it. But the people that I've admired the most, just fucking threw those things for a loop. I big fan of Harmony Korine. I think that, even if you go back to like the films that we as like film lovers really love, like you mentioned when we were texting last night, Grey Gardens, the Maisel brothers. Like, sure, they were shooting on film, and right now we have this romantic view of like film being beautiful, 16 millimeter being beautiful, but they took it up because it was cheap, and you can move it around. They were using a tool. They weren't using it because 16 millimeter looked romantic. That's just what they had.
You know?
Did you guys see Crystal Mazel's Wolfpack?
Yes.
The Wolfpack?
Yes.
I don't think so.
It's a good film.
Yeah, it's really good, Catherine. We should
Okay,
have an
it down.
episode about that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, actually, she's cool. She's cool. So I was lucky. The producer of that film I had worked with, and so I assistant edited on that film for like a month, and had the opportunity to like go through. I didn't do that much good probably for the film, but I got to spend like about a month with her in Brooklyn, going through all of her raw footage and talking to her about her film, and just like watching these interviews. And she's a person who's had like pretty good access as far as like she does commercial fashion work. She had a fair amount of access. She had enough access that she could email Quentin Tarantino, which plays a little bit into the film. She does a film about kids that are like obsessed with movies. But she was making this like on a 7D, like whenever she could. She saw these kids walking around, and she just started like hanging out with them and filming. And it was this obsessive need just to know who they were. And then at some point it became this need to like show the world who they are, because they're like it's like this really special family. And I don't know, I was really inspired by that, and ultimately by her film, which was completely different than what I thought she was going to make. And I saw in her raw footage she had tried for several years to make another kind of film. You know, she had tried to do what she'd always done, like this sort of stylish, not fashion film, but was certainly drawn by her like fashion career. And ultimately, she worked with the right editor and like the right time. Like took the right time to make the film that was what it became. And it's a really, really wonderful, strong film. But she wasn't. She had all the access to the gatekeepers, and she still made this like deeply personal work. And I think that's just like an impulsive thing. Like that's just like there's people who just have that in them that can't not make the film, no matter what sort of barriers are set up against this. We also have to stop. I mean, it's the nature to want to be accepted by other people and want to. And I mean, I talk about gatekeepers, but like we want. I would love for the Brooklyn film scene to embrace me, or to play movies at BAM. You know, and I feel like I've made films as good as any of the films that are playing at lots of New York film festivals or film festivals across the country. That I can't, you know, year after year after year. You know, I'm submitting work that I really believe in, and I can't break through, and it's super frustrating.
Yeah.
But
I feel you there.
I can't make films for them. You know.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that it's like the body of work is going to matter, and it's like if I can, I'm gonna stack my films on top of each other and then jump the fence.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's the only way I can imagine building a career out of making personal, like seriously personal work. You know.
Yeah. And I know Zach and I go through that too, where we're like, oh, we need to have like a gimbal shot right here. And then I'll be like, because, you know, we need to make sure people know that we know how to make films. And then we'll be like, oh, we need more coverage in this scene because a two-shot this whole and then we always have to take a step back and be like, why? Why? We don't want to do that. Like, we're trying to make a film with this kind of style and with this kind of tone when we go in. And then we start getting scared that everybody's going to think that we don't know how to make a film like you're supposed to. And then we're like, you know, and I think that that's just such a silly thing. And it's something that's like perpetuated a lot, especially in this kind of like, we're really in this like YouTube era with like low budget films where everybody just like on YouTube has like a channel that shows you how to use a drone or what the best camera is. And, and it's, yeah, and it's all just to sell stuff and to have affiliate links. And
well, it is. Yeah, it's branded content, or it's branded content, or the attempt to be branded content. And I mean, like I said, I do shoot lots of like food advertising. I know what those people think they're trying to do, and they're not creative people. I mean, at the end of the day,
nope.
I think that's,
and they're not. And they want to set bars and rules because that's the only way that they can understand. And certain structure. That's the only way they can understand how things get done, and that's how it works in their world. You know, so not to knock them, it's just how it works in the world. And to make truly personal, creative work, you can't abide by those rules. Yeah, I think that's the funny thing is. I've been working on some new stuff lately that I first started. I get kind of obsessed with like wanting, because I'm a cinematographer as well. So like I want to like light stuff beautifully and like do stuff and like have a great gimbal shot or something that feels like a movie. and I was doing that, and I get these scenes end up being so stiff feeling, and so like I'm like, it's missing that like impulsive whatever. And I've been thinking a lot about like this thing I'm calling like the subconscious film. Like I'm always documenting stuff. I'm making field notes. I'm like, if I start shooting like and not really knowing where I'm going, that's okay. And like, what will that film look like? And then I'm starting to mess with the iPhone a little more and like shooting stuff on the iPhone and mixing like some beautifully lit, nice stuff with some iPhone footage that I'm shooting out like out in the wild. And I'm really like, it's amazing how it feels to go from like a nicely lit, kind of cool, like lockdown scene to suddenly somebody first person filming and using that sort of like internet language that we're talking about, that YouTube language, and interjecting a little bit of that stuff in there, but with the intention of like making it messy. And it really does suddenly feel like I'm looking at Super 8 film or Maisley Brothers stuff. It just feels like so much more real. So I don't know. I do think that there is something about embracing technology and trying to break it or make it feel more raw and real. You know, I think that does go a long way into, you know, if to me it's about having like being able to work at the pace of our ideas.
Yeah.
You know, that's the issue with documentary, and especially like and once again, I'm not mad at Netflix about it because they're making lots of really cool films, great documentary series and everything, but they all have a look, and they have Netflix has like not arbitrary, but they have a set of rules for what cameras you can shoot on.
Yep.
That's absurd to me. That's absurd.
Yeah.
Like I don't understand how that's even why we say, oh, okay, well these business people get to decide what cameras we're going to shoot our films on, and if not, then we don't get to be part of that platform. And that platform's like has the biggest voice.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, unless it's like Steven Soderbergh and he's shooting on an iPhone, then it's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, God bless him. God bless Soderbergh for fucking things up.
I love that. Yeah. That's what I appreciate about him. He was one of the first people that grabbed a digital camera and was like, and made that film bubble. I remember that was like such a big deal because everybody's like, he made it on a handy cam.
Yeah. You know? It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that people do that. And I think that should be embraced and really because it's really about what's in the film.
Totally. Yeah. And trying to capture we're capturing time, you know, we're capturing time and people, and there's not a certain pixel count that can do that better than something else.
Absolutely.
No matter what.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen incredible films made in like 2017 on VHS tapes that were like amazing films. So
totally. I mean, one of my favorite documentaries of all time is Tarnation.
Oh, beautiful! What a beautiful film.
Amazing film. And I mean, that's like mostly home video footage, right? I mean, just like early digital, like messy footage by all standards, and it's just so gorgeous.
Absolutely.
It's such a powerful, poetic film. And it's that messiness, that brokenness of the aesthetic in general that really makes it so wonderful.
So do you have any like projects coming up that like you're really excited about, or even like people you've met that you're hoping to work with or make a subject?
You know, well, yeah, I am. I'm making Josh. Both of you. No, we've got another film that we've finished that my brother directed that I shot called For the Love of Food. And it's a much more talking head documentary about food. So now I wouldn't say food influencers, but people who shape food media. And initially it was like, well, we'll do a film about just, you know, food writers and stuff because we had met people on like trips that we were shooting for editorial food stuff. And then it ended up becoming, we decided, especially after the last election, that we needed to make all the work in some way political, which ultimately the work is political anyway. But so the film ends up really being about sort of the racial bias, LGBTQ, and really the Me Too movement as well is sort of all in this like documentary that's explaining what food media is. And so it's a really wonderful film. It has not. It really has not. It's having a hard time get its foot in the door with film festivals. I'm not entirely sure why, because I think it is mostly talking heads. Like my brother did an interesting thing where I would say the movie's like probably 90% talking heads with some like pretty B-roll, like some food porn and some other stuff that's nice. But it's like they kind of finish each other's sentences, and it's like kind of a really cool. I think he developed a really cool talking head style, but it's and it's definitely, it lives within a bubble a little bit. So so that's called For the Love of Food, and that's done, and that's going to come out hopefully soon. That may end up just going out on Amazon and not playing a film festival, which is ultimately fine, because I think that's where its audience lives anyway, because it's about media. And then we're doing another doc series with Entourage's Adrian Grenier. He is building a sustainable house in Brooklyn, and for his mother. And so we've been doing this. We've been shooting for about a year. This sort of, I think it's going to be a little series. I'm not really sure what it's going to become, but we've been documenting this house being made. So that's pretty cool. I'm excited about that. Once it's done, it turns out making a documentary about a house being built is a pretty slow, arduous process. It will reveal itself once the house is done, and we can look back and be like, oh my God, there was no walls there before. But it's cool. It has like helped shape my focus a little bit as far as like wanting to make film about the environment, and doing more sort of earth-focused stuff. So hopefully that's kind of the next. I really want to do a documentary about water, and not cool. not just like Josh Fox's, like that's his name, right? Josh Fox. Not like fracking necessarily, but just like how the thing that happened in Flint can happen almost in any small town in America, and it has a lot to do with whether or not there are middle class or rich white people. So I would like to do a film about water, just about the nature of our drinking water. But I don't know if that's just sort of. And then lastly, my friend Richie Buenagorio. He made this film a couple years ago, which not very many people have seen, but it's kind of amazing, called Stage Brother, and it's on Amazon. I really recommend you see it. It's about his sister wanted to be in Playboy, and so he became her manager, and then he like took her out to LA to audition for Playboy. But it really has a lot to do with their family. They're like New Jersey Italian. But we're talking about making a film in similar adult themes, but about the nature of sex work and sort of the people that are, at least here in New York, that are trying to educate people about it. So, yeah, that's a long-winded answer for I'm trying to do too many things at once.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the release of Good Monsters, and what is that looking like right now?
Totally. Well, the film's going to premiere May 3rd in Indianapolis, and then plays again that weekend. And then I put out all my stuff through this company called Film Hub, which allows me to do. They're an amazing company, actually. They don't pay me to talk about them. I wish they did, because I really think they've like changed the game. But it's a way for me to get on a lot of big platforms without having to sign bad deals, because it's sort of, I get to keep all the rights to my films. I get like 70% royalties. They're just kind of an amazing platform for delivering to all kinds of places. So the idea is to put Good Monsters out. It's set to go, so hopefully I'll pull the trigger to land shortly after the film festival, which ends like May 12th or something. So ideally, Good Monsters will be available to watch by the end of May on Amazon. That's my goal, because I want to use. It's like the first time where I've been able to sort of control this, where I want to like. I would love to have a film festival run, but also very happy to just premiere in Indianapolis. Like I said, I've been working on it for several years. I'm ready for a little bit of closure. Premiere in Indianapolis and then have it just available for people to watch shortly after. I think that's sort of like my version of day and date. So hopefully by the end of the May, it'll be available on Amazon and a bunch of other VOD platforms.
And that kind of reminds me, I wanted to ask the question on who had the idea of the dancing with the masks on with the fireworks.
Well, that's a good question. I think that was probably a combination. I mean, we had this idea to put those, like, he had done these like wooden cutouts of these like what he calls his Good Monsters. We were going to put them all over town, and he had put some out and like they're usually gone within a day, but they're really, they're tough to make. You've got to like cut them out of like plywood and paint them, and so it wasn't easy just to drop 30 around town. But I was like, well, we had 3 good ones. Let's at least get this captured on camera, doing the dancing thing. And I really want to do a dance film in general. Like, I want to do a film that's primarily dance. So it was my opportunity to, like, have him play around. And he loves, just like me, and you see across the board with most of my films, I love, like, animal masks and stuff that's, like, people wearing masks. So for whatever weird reason, lifelong obsession with costumes, I guess. But so that was sort of a combination thing. That's where we wanted to have these scenes that were, like, both obviously documentary, but also projections or versions of his art, where I was like, this is what I would do if I were making your art, or like showing your art, choosing that over showing process, I guess, essentially, because watching someone paint isn't that exciting. Watching someone put a mask and dance in front of fire is awesome.
That is true.
I think I'm going to call this episode that.
Oh, you guys are rad. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for talking about your film. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Where can people find you and your other work?
You can go to ryanbalas.com or robelfilms.com. That's ROBEL films.com. And certainly most of the films have landed on Amazon Prime. Not Safe for Work, NSFW, has since been kicked off of Amazon, but hopefully it'll come back soon. I don't know. They're starting to censor some films, and that one gets a little more censored than others.
So I do want to like shout out to people to watch. Oh shit! Why am I forgetting the name of it? The one about your wedding.
Oh, Ice Saints.
Ice Saints.
Yeah.
I was gonna say Cold Souls, and then I was like, no, that's Paul Giamatti movie.
Cold Souls is the follow-up.
I want to say, I want to suggest that everyone go watch Ice Saints. It's a beautiful blend of like fiction and non.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite films. Like, I'm just gonna say that, like, hands down. Like,
that's so nice.
It's a beautiful film. So
thank you so much.
Absolutely. Really nice. And I'll put links to all that stuff in the bio. And if there's anything you want to say to close out, this is your time.
Well, I just love what you guys are doing. I'm so glad you're doing this podcast. It's been fun listening to at the gym. So I hope you keep doing it. I'm excited to watch both of your guys' new work.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there about just making the thing you want to make, not letting people discourage you from making the art you want to make. And when we say things like, oh, you can just make a movie with your iPhone, just go do it.
And be resourceful, and don't doubt your ideas. I think that's the biggest thing, is have an idea, just go start filming it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find us on Instagram at A Documentary Podcast.
And our website at documentarypodcast.com.
And you can follow me at Joshua LeVior.
And then me at CMS Moments.
And if you have any suggestions for films that you want us to talk about, let us know.
Yeah, please do.
And until next week.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.